With a twist of the key, Kwame tried to start the car. The engine sputtered, coughed, and then died. He frowned, turning the key again. Nothing. He tried once more, pumping the pedals, his patience thinning. The car remained stubbornly silent. Abeni stood by the window, her hands clasped tightly together. "Maybe this is a sign," she whispered. "Maybe we should pray." But Kwame wasn't listening. His frustration boiled over, and he slammed his hands against the dashboard. "It's just a car issue. We need a mechanic, not a prayer." A local mechanic arrived, a young man with grease-stained overalls and tools jangling at his waist. He worked under the hood for nearly an hour, wiping sweat from his brow as the sun climbed higher. Finally he straightened, his expression grim. "The engine is knocked," he announced. "It will need major repairs. You're not going anywhere with this van." Kwame's face turned red, his jaw clenched. The children, sensing his anger, fell silent. Abeni only closed her eyes, the edges of her lips curving into a sad, knowing smile. To her, this was not a breakdown but a breakthrough, a divine intervention, a barrier of protection that only God could erect. "It's a sign," she said softly, though Kwame heard it clearly. Her words hung in the air, fragile and yet unyielding. "Enough." Kwame's voice was sharp. "We are going to the village. If the van won't take us, then we'll go by bus. End of discussion." The children cheered, their fear replaced by excitement at the prospect of a bus ride. Abeni's heart tightened, but she said nothing more. She knew that pushing further would only harden Kwame's resolve, and so the new plan was set. Far away from the hum of the city, under the wide and watchful sky of the village, shadows gathered in the heart of Mama Zubeida. She sat by the window of her mud-walled house, her eyes narrowed as she watched the children in the compound next door playing with makeshift toys. Their laughter grated against her skin, each peal a reminder of what she lacked. She had been Kwame's stepmother since he was a young boy, stepping into the role after his mother passed away. She had raised him, fed him, and clothed him, but her heart had always been bitter. When Kwame left the village, he left behind the poverty that clung to her like a second skin. He returned each Christmas with gifts and stories of the city, his children dressed in bright, clean clothes, his wife Abeni, with a gentle smile that never seemed to fade. Her resentment festered, turning her kindness into thorns. She envied their joy, their blessings, and how the village elders always spoke of Kwame with pride. To her, every bag of rice he donated, every new cloth he brought, was a reminder of how much more he had. She could no longer bear it alone. She called on Mama Kofi, her closest friend and confidant, who arrived wrapped in a shawl, her face set in perpetual curiosity. Over a pot of steaming herbal tea, Mama Zubeida poured out her anger, her words sharp and cutting. "Why should he have everything," she hissed, "while I, who raised him, remain with nothing but empty hands and an empty stomach?" Mama Kofi's eyes darkened, and she leaned in close. "Envy is a heavy burden, sister, but perhaps it is time to shift that weight. There are ways, ancient ways." The room seemed to cool as the conversation turned. Whispers filled the space, like shadows slipping between the cracks. And so the decision was made. They would go to the witches, the keepers of the village's darkest secrets, those who spoke to spirits and twisted fate with a flick of the wrist. The night was thick with mist when they arrived at the small hut on the edge of the forest. The witches sat in a circle, their faces hidden beneath layers of cloth and mystery. The air smelled of burning herbs and something older, something rotten beneath the earth. Mama Zubeida presented her offering, a shirt of Kwame's, one he had left behind during his last visit. The witches took it, their fingers long and thin, nails blackened by soil and smoke. They chanted softly, their voices merging with the crackle of the fire. Ashes were scattered into the wind, each flake a wish for misfortune. The witches' hands moved rhythmically, drawing patterns in the dirt. A gourd was broken, and dark liquid seeped into the earth. They spoke of a curse, a deadly accident, a shadow over the road, a twist of fate that would keep Kwame's family from ever reaching the village. Mama Zubeida watched, her breath shallow, as the ritual unfolded. A part of her felt the weight of what she had set in motion, but the bitterness in her heart burned away any hesitation. Mama Kofi stood beside her, their fingers entwined, sharing the guilt, sharing the power. When it was over, the witches turned their blank eyes upon her, "It is done," they said in unison. "But blood calls for blood. What you have sown, you shall also reap." Mama Zubaydah forced a smile, ignoring the cold that wrapped around her bones. She and Mama Kofi left under the cover of darkness, their steps quiet, but the curse loud in the wind. And as the night swallowed them, the village seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere in the distance a bird called, a low, mournful sound that hung in the air long after silence returned. The morning was gray and heavy as Kwame and his family arrived at the bustling bus park. The air was thick with the mingling scents of fried dough, diesel fumes, and the warm breath of countless travelers. Vendors wove through the crowds, balancing trays of bread and cool drinks on their heads, their voices rising in sharp, rhythmic chants. The bus park seemed like its own small world, chaotic and loud, with the hum of life threading through every corner. Kwame held tightly to little Abena's hand, his other arm wrapped protectively around Amma and Kofi, as they weaved through the throng of people. Abena walked behind them, her lips moving in silent prayer, her eyes scanning the faces of strangers with a sense of quiet urgency. She felt the weight of the day pressing against her spirit, the old woman's warning echoing in her heart, mingling with the bitter taste of Mama Zubaydah's unspoken envy. The bus, a large faded vehicle with peeling blue paint and windows that rattled in their frames, stood waiting. Its engine grumbled like a restless beast. Passengers crowded around, shoving bags into the hold, greeting old friends and haggling with the driver over fare discrepancies. As they settled into their seats near the back, Abeni felt a pull in her chest. She stood, turning to face the passengers. Mothers cradling babies, young men with backpacks, old women with bundles of herbs and woven mats. She knew she needed to speak, to do what she could, even if it was small. "Please," she called out, her voice soft but steady. "Let us pray before we begin our journey." A few heads turned. Some passengers nodded, their faces softening as they bowed their heads. Others ignored her, their eyes fixed on their phones or on the window, lost in their own worlds. A few chuckled under their breath, and among them, Kwame sat rigid, his face flushed with embarrassment.